Another episode of Coffee with Friends. Today I will be joined by Eleanor and Lauren. As a reminder, Coffee with Friends may discuss trauma of all sorts, to including abuse of all types. Viewers and listeners may find it unsettling and triggering. If this live stream causes you distress, please cease listening until you're able to listen again. You may also seek support from your trusted folks and qualified mental health professionals as needed. With that being said, welcome to the show. Hi, Eleanor. Hi, Lauren. How y'all doing? Yeah. Well, first off, like nobody knows who you are, so if y'all want to like introduce yourselves, that would be wonderful. Starting with Lauren, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, so I am Lauren and I grew up in what is called the Trunk Revival Centre. So it is a high control Pentecostal group that believes in the end of times, the end of the world, and the second coming of Christ. Um, and now I run a business selling stickers that raises awareness around the mental health effects of religious trauma and the mental health effects of life.
Well, I'm so glad you could join us and thank you so much. I do think that shunning and mental health kind of, might have some kind of impacts on each other, but sure. Hi, Eleanor. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Eleanor. I have been writing about leaving the Independent Fundamental Baptist Church for about 10 years now. Um, and that's where most of like my experience comes from, but I have a lot of other friends from other high control religious backgrounds, like ex-Pentecostal. So I'm always interested in talking to people from other groups too. So yeah, and yes, I was shunned when I left my church. And funny enough, I'm actually right now at a coffee in the same neighborhood as where I was shunned, which is ironic.
What a perfect place for you to like come join us from. Do you feel like you're doing the Lord's work?
Yes.
So, why are you guys interested in talking about shunning specifically? I mean, I know you were shunned, but what about that like makes you want to talk about it?
I think the fact that there isn't enough conversation or support for when you do make that decision and you're on the other side. I think the fact that when you make a decision to leave not just a religion, but a family unit that also believes in that same particular thing, it can lead to so much confusion, cognitive dissonance, and just sadness, loneliness, isolation as well. I know when I first left, I was 18. I still didn't know how the world functioned at all. I was incredibly naive in a lot of aspects of life when I first left. And I think that needs to change.
Hmm. Yeah, you mentioned like the family impact. Okay, that makes sense. And then you have like the social isolation, but now you're running this
Yep.
organization for mental health, so that totally tracks and makes
Yes.
sense to me. What about you, Eleanor?
Thank
Why
you.
do you want to talk about shunning?
Well, I think that it's something that a lot of people don't really understand who didn't grow up in a high control background. And it seems to be a common theme with a lot of people I know who have experienced high control religion, where they grew up in a family that was very, very enmeshed. Like you do everything together all the time, and even more enmeshed with your family than you are with your church. But like that's considered like the safe people, right? The people who are following God, and this is my little isolated community where I'm safe. Um, and trying to explain that to my college professors when I was first being ostracized from my church because I decided to move out was really hard to understand, to like just explain to people. Like my first therapist at my college was purely secular, and he was really trying to understand, but he didn't get it. And he also didn't have the background with Christianity to really get it. So like, I think it's important to explain like why it feels so bad to this depth, because like people on the outside can tell you stuff like, well, this is really codependent, like you need to live your own life, like, and not let your family control you and stuff like that, and all of that is very true. Yes, you do need to work through that and recover, but it feels a certain way in the moment when it's happening, and because you've never experienced anything else really in your life, it's really hard for people to understand why it's so upsetting to you, like crippling to the point that you might have a chronic illness flare and a depression flare and have to drop college classes. People don't understand why you can't just cope with it, but this has been like your whole life, and you're losing your whole life.
So what I heard is that there was a very strict, like, in-group versus out-group, like an us versus them mentality. Like only the good people are people who are part of the group. If they don't belong to the group, or if they don't believe exactly the same way as the group, then they kind of get cast aside. And now you no longer belong. So you lose your sense of belonging. But humans, isn't it just human to like want to belong somewhere? And then you're trying to explain this to even secular mental health providers, but they might have been a little bit out of their depth. Like they perhaps were a bit unqualified to be providing that specific type of religious trauma recovery therapy because they didn't have the understanding, the education, the information, and the knowledge to be able to assist you in navigating out of that.
I think that is absolutely true, because like the second therapist I saw at college, this was like 10 years ago. She's a really sweet person, but again, she came from a form of Christianity, but is like progressive, LGBT affirming and stuff. And but even then, she was like, I didn't have the same experiences as you, and I obviously think these things are very harmful. Um, but she was really trying to understand. And one of my friends actually is now going to my college and has seen her more recently and brought me up. And the therapist response was, oh God, like I was a baby therapist at that point. I was out of my depth, basically. And I thought that was kind of funny. I mean, like she was honest about it, you know? And I wonder if my first therapist that was secular would feel that way too. I would guess probably so. Hopefully they've encountered more people. I mean, this is in Colorado Springs, so there's bound to be a lot more people that they've encountered with these types of issues. But even like my professors and stuff, they were like, they wanted to see me succeed and they meant the best for me. But they were like, you've got to like figure out a way to be able to function and like finish your college classes and graduate. And that's what I wanted too. But sometimes it was just so hard. It felt like this heavy weight was on me. Like all I could think about was the fact that like I have lost my entire community within a few days, a week. And then I was getting letters from people asking me to repent and come back. And I worried a lot about being followed and being stalked. I was very paranoid because I just really didn't know what would happen next, because people would just sometimes drop by my apartment and try to get me to come back. And I wasn't really sure what links people might go to and justify to make me come back, if that makes sense.
So, can I ask you something?
Yeah.
You say you were really paranoid, but people would just drop by and try to have you repent of wanting to live on your own at 22 years of age, right? Like
Yes.
okay. So that was your sin, right? This was your unholiest of unholy sins. That made you a whole Jezebel, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Because
So
because the pastor literally told me that if you move out on your own and you leave your father's protection, he basically believed in Bill Gothard's theory. Or at least even if he didn't believe it, he was using it against me. That you have to be under your father's protection until you're under your husband's protection. And so that was a sin to leave and be out from under the protection. If your parents allowed you to move out, that was one thing, but yours weren't allowing you. So that was a sin. And he told me that I was following Satan. So like my parents were like
Oh,
worried about me. Yeah. My
oh,
parents
that
were
got escalated quickly.
yes, he literally said you were following Satan. And I was like, oh, great, thanks. So I cried like because I had always been a good kid at church and stuff for the most part. Like I've been strong-willed in some ways, but I had never like been in trouble with the pastor before. I didn't know my whole life was going to implode when I told him I wanted to move out. I thought he might not like it, but I didn't know it was going to implode. And my parents were like worried because they saw it as like our child is sinning. And so they ended up like they would drop by my college and like they would find my bicycle because I didn't have a car at first. And so they would drop by and leave sermon CDs in my book bag on my bike and stuff like
So,
that to try to make me come back.
so was that really paranoid, or were they harassing you?
It was like harassing and stalking. I was like, my brain kept trying to think, well, what else might someone do? And not
Mm-hmm.
all of that was actually reality. But when you're in that mental state, you're like, well, if this person is super desperate to do something or make me do something to conform to their religion, what other links might they go to? So
So again, was it
it's hard to
paranoia?
know.
Was it really paranoia? Was it based on people's actions and behaviors that told you
Um,
that you were unsafe?
I feel like both, because like my brain was coming up with all these other things that were probably not reality, but there was a reality happening for sure
Okay.
as well, if that makes sense.
So, Eleanor, when I did a mental health assessment to be diagnosed as autistic, one of the questions they asked me was, "Does your birth family support you?" If I say no, it's the truth. Do I think? And then another question was, "Do I think people are stalking and harassing me?" If I say yes, it's the truth. But also, is that paranoia?
Well, if they're really doing stalking and harassing behaviors, then it's like reality.
Uh-huh. Okay.
But like my anxiety came up with a lot of things that didn't happen and assumed some other things that I've since realized like, okay, that wasn't true. You know.
Well, of
But like
course, like you're
trauma
afraid.
brain,
Yeah,
like
like your trauma brain,
like
like you're living in survival mode. So you're
right.
coming up with like all of the scenarios so you can mentally prepare. That's not making it so that you're talking about these things as if they didn't happen. Is it really paranoia? Or
Yeah.
simply trying to keep yourself alive and safe?
Yeah.
I'm 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 sorry.
Yeah.
I'm
No,
sorry.
you're good.
Lauren, do you have thoughts? I mean, oh, we can't hear you. We I can't hear Lauren. Can you hear her?
I can't either.
Nope. We still can't hear you.
Oh no, it's not working.
Oh my word. Well, this has been a fun time. We'll see if we can figure out the audio. Anyways, so with that being said, I just think that often, like when we're in survival mode, the way we respond, and when you have just lost, like when you are part of an insular religious group, when you're part of a high control religious group, and like your group is very insular and isolated, and they're often disconnected, and they uphold this firm like us versus them mentality, and you exit that group. When you escape, you are very vulnerable, and it can be devastating. It can be devastating on so many levels. Like, I know that there's people that would say Well, you knew they were going to shun you because you were
Mm-hmm.
baptized in the church and because blah, 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 blah. Right? Um, they would say, you knew.
They would
Hello?
say, you knew. Hello?
Hello? Yes. Okay. I had to mute Lauren because I was getting an echo. So now let's try this again. Anyways, so they would say you knew that you were going to be shunned, so it's your fault. You made this decision to leave the church, and now we're showing you love by harassing you, writing you letters, telling you you're going to hell. I still have letters that are just a little something, but that was part of the way that they looked at us, like the prodigal son, the prodigal child. Like we have to be repentant of our sin, and if our sin is like, oh, we didn't want to be part of an enmeshed family, well, I guess like that just made us follow
Mm-hmm.
Satan straight to the devil. Anyways, Lauren, did you have thoughts about this?
I think a lot of it is certainly it comes down to fight or flight. I think the way our brains rewire everything, and when you said, it protects us and it can create situations and scenarios, and my brain's done the exact same thing on countless topics as well. And being able to get yourself off that circle and off the loop, I did find psychology helpful for that. I know Eleanor was talking about it earlier, and I as well have had many a psychologist in my lifetime. And it wasn't until later on down the track that I think it was like maybe the fourth or the fifth psychologist that I was seeing, I actually finally had the language to say, I've left a cult or I've left a high control group and my family's cut me off. Before I was wording it to say, I grew up in a really religious household and my family don't speak to me anymore. And people were just sort of like, that's sad. And you're like, yeah, but no one really dug deeper to go, well, why isn't her family talking to her? Why isn't she talking to her family? Why does she have 3 siblings that she doesn't have contact with? Things like that. So I think if the mental health world looked deeper or they had the right questions straight off the bat to go, this participant has mentioned religion. Well, okay, what the question maybe could be looked at, well, what would it look like if you were to leave that religion? Would your family follow you? And I think for a lot of us, it would be no, they wouldn't follow us.
Another thing. Okay. Some of you already know, some of the people who will watch this or listen to this, they already know that I cry about good things and I cry about bad things and I cry about everything in between. I cry, okay? A lot. Thank you. Anyways, so if I cry about this one, just know that there's a silver lining here. Well, not really. But so like one of the things too that people often lose when they leave a group that is religious, and they may not think that it's a high control group, but they often lose access to familial resources or support or community resources and support. Um, Today I bought a car for my 17-year-old. Um, I bought that car through the assistance of one of my connections that I've made with people. Uh, when I was talking about the fact that, like, I'm financially looking at this, it's expensive. I don't have a lot of money, and it's difficult. This friend of mine said, "No, I got your back. We got your back. We're gonna help you do this." Well, they did help me do that, and it means the world to me. But like, it's also one of those things where people often think that, well, why don't you just do it? They don't understand that the financial safety networks that many people have, we don't have. We've never had that. Like when you wanted to go buy your first car, I don't know who helped you buy your first car.
I want
My college professor did. His older mother wasn't driving anymore, and she had a 1996 Toyota Avalon. This was in 2012, and it had only 20,000 miles on it. And so he sold it to me for $3,000.
My first car, I paid $500 for in 2004. It was a little black with red stripes Pontiac Grand Prix. The gas gauge didn't work on it. I had to track the miles, so I didn't run out of gas. Literally, but like that's like the thing is my family of origin didn't help me. I had a lot of yeah. I had like eventually I had people who did help me, and like in a way it's like amazing that like all these years later now I get to have people who kind of do show up when they can. Like that's so I want people to know that even if you're struggling today, tomorrow may be better. Someday that day may come. But I also think that is part of why we need to talk about the impacts of mandated social isolation, because it doesn't just impact us, it also impacts our future generations. Especially when you start talking about the access to resources, the financial impacts, the familial impacts, the community resources, like all of that matters.
I think if it was more streamlined, it would make it easier for people to access,
Yeah, you think?
but it's not.
So, do you think, Eleanor, that people need more access to resources than what we're giving them at this moment in time when they leave groups like that?
Yes, actually, this is why I kind of started like a grassroots network in college, which like I had no idea what I was doing. I had just left myself, and my friends started to leave about a year after me. I happened to be like the first. So obviously like made a lot of mistakes, but um, basically every time I know of someone who is leaving a high control group who may need resources, I post in my group and promote it that way. It's called the Unboxing Project. Because like I used to talk about, like it felt like I had left a box, like I lived my whole life in a box and I had to escape the box. And so like at one point my blog was called The Girl Who Once Lived in a Box. Like there was a lot of box imagery happening here. um, like I had a Facebook group called For Box People. Like so
I love that. That's so cool.
yeah. And so like I have helped house people, and sometimes it's worked out well and sometimes it hasn't worked out well, because when people are used to being able to set no boundaries for themselves, sometimes they are not used to other people having boundaries. Like if someone takes you into their home, like it's with, hey, like I'm also a refugee from high control religion, don't share my address with people, so don't share my address maybe without telling me, because I want to keep both of us safe. And those kind of things, sometimes they don't always understand and respect that. And so I've also had to like have some really hard lines with some people, and there are some people that I have helped that I don't talk to anymore. But like, I mean, I wish we always got along with all of the other refugees. It's hard when everybody has complex trauma, and some people are willing to go to therapy and work through it, and some people are not. So,
Mhm.
but anyway, like I've also gotten to help a lot of people. It's been a difficult thing to do, but it's also been really important. And like when I was upgrading my car in 2019, I gave my old car to somebody who had gone through a really bad situation. Ex fundamentalist, had been human trafficked, and had a young kid. And we just needed $300 to, I was willing to just like give them the car. I think according to the law, I had to say I was selling it for an amount. So I said like $1. And then we needed $300 for the title and registration fees. and we were able to fundraise on Facebook and online to make that happen, which was awesome.
That's
That's
awesome.
amazing. I think that one of the things that I am most proud of is, when people who exit those groups often having that understanding of we all have complex trauma. That doesn't mean that just because, like, Lauren and I might talk about our trauma differently or in different tones of voices or whatever, that doesn't mean that we're bad people just because of that. And then the other part is the way that I have personally watched this movement grow for the last 11 years. I would say this movement of like people who have been dissenting against these harmful oppressive ideologies, it has grown. It has grown a lot. um, it's a whole different landscape out there nowadays compared to what it used to be. And I think that mental health professionals and even medical professionals, they can find content like this where they can inform themselves better on what to expect with people like us who come from these different backgrounds. Like Eleanor always said, she came from a box. I always felt like I felt like I was property, okay? Like I literally felt like I was property. That's how I felt. I still feel that way. I don't know what Lauren felt like, but when you have like your whole life mapped out, you're told what to do, where to go, how to conduct yourself, how to walk, how to talk, how to dress, all of these things so that you conform to them and then you're acceptable. And then all of a sudden you're like floating out there and you're just adrift at sea. It's like you're caught up in this tornado and you don't know where to go. And that the expectation from the group, the internal expectation from the group that now because you're not complying with these directives, because that's all this is. All this is patriarchal authority. That's all this is, because these are men in charge of us. Like you said your pastor was, what was his name? I forget. Well, you
Oh,
don't have to tell me. Yeah.
no, you're good. Yeah, I'm pretty open about it. So Jeff Anderson, and it was Grace Bible Church in Colorado Springs. He actually later was asked to take a sabbatical, and then he resigned because he had secretly married his one of his sons to one of the Russian pastor's daughters, because we had a Russian service at our church. And that was against the rules at the Air Force Academy, where his son had a scholarship, and a bunch of the elders were on the had been retired Air Force or part
I'm
of the
sorry.
Air Force Academy, so they ratted him out.
I'm
And so it's really kind of funny because he had a lot of double standards, I feel like, because okay, so it's fine to literally lie to the government and secret marry your son to avoid the appearance of evil, but I can't move out of my parents' house. Okay, cool, that makes sense.
And that makes it so hard because like all this was about power and control. And then your
Yeah.
family, like, so for example, so you're sitting there, so this patriarchal authority over you, you said I reject your patriarchal authority over me, and you took back your power. That's what happens. That's what really happens.
Yeah.
That's what the real problem is. You took back your power and you said, what? I'm going to live my life. And then magically, even though he thought he had all this power and authority, all of a sudden, the proximity to power no longer benefited him. Always interesting. Do you have thoughts on that, Lauren?
Um, I think it's really, really interesting. And I think wherever you go, there's always the double standards. But when you look deeper within these types of groups, the double standards is like from here to absolutely here. And I think the higher you look up as well, I think the more, but also the less scrutiny is also had. I think if people looked deeper into what the higher ups were actually doing, I think they'd question a lot. I think freedom for everyone as well looks different. When I was 18, I had this whole idea of if I leave, I'm free. But I
Uh-huh.
kind of wasn't, because I was still so traumatized and still I had no idea who I was. I had spent 18 years building this personality and building who I was within a family unit and within a church group and a friend and a sister and all that type of things. And then when I left, I didn't have that. I didn't have my core as to who I was anymore. And I think that in freedom makes it hard for people as well, because they feel sort of shackled to their old self, going, but I miss that, but I also want to still be free.
Well, because it's human to want connection. And
Yeah.
when you grew up with people, you often feel connected to them. Like I have a I have emotions and a connection with people from my community and family of origin that grew up with me in the same environment and experienced many of the things that I experienced that is
Mm.
different than, say, the people from that kind of community, but not exactly the same. Like
Yeah.
I can connect to you on the premise of like we speak out against these practices because the practice of mandated shunning, that is
Yeah.
harmful. It harms people in so many ways, and it casts people out. It also tells people that stalking, harassment, and pretty much bullying people is love.
Yeah.
And I don't agree with that.
No. No. And I think it sets relationships up in a worst way possible too. You know, as women as well, and as young girls, we're taught particular teachings and particular ways of, I guess, navigating relationships. And sometimes, most often than not, they're far from how we're meant to be navigating them as well.
Uh-huh. Like, I just, okay, let's read this comment from Jennifer. Jennifer says, my pastor told me to be homeless and live in my car
Mm.
after I left. Oh, because that was love. Okay. I'm sorry, the sarcasm. I How can you pretend that you are following the teachings of Jesus and that's what you do? Okay, I'm done. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah,
I'm
I think without getting nasty, I think a lot of it, in my personal experience with this one, I know it wasn't so much the pastor that told me to be homeless, but I do remember there was an instance where I was 18, I was sitting on a park bench and it was quite late at night. I'd called family, particularly my dad, and asked for just one night at home. And the story that I got was I had to be the prodigal son. And I think that's where they weaponize scriptures as well in order to go, well, they're in a really vulnerable spot. And if we put them deeper into a vulnerable spot, we'll be able to then, I guess, beckon them back into the fold. And that's not necessarily what people want when they leave.
Another thing is when you make access to resources contingent on compliance, all you're doing is trading out one controlling environment for another one. Also, what you're doing is you're telling people, unless you live your life the way I've decided you must live your life, I'm not, you're not good enough. I've decided
Yeah.
you're not good enough. And so that kind of upholds the moral superiority complex. Like setting boundaries for people to allow you to connect in a healthy way is kind of like what Eleanor was talking about. Okay, so here's my boundary. I can't make you respect this boundary, but if you have a boundary violation, I can let you know that I'm going to ask you to leave my premise because you're unsafe and you're affecting my safety. For me, it's also the safety of my child. Like, you don't get to just go around and give out my child's information or my information or my address or what kind of car I drive. Like those things, you don't put that information out there because that is a safety issue. My car was literally stolen from my driveway.
Oh,
Like
jeez.
almost 3 years ago. I can't even. I've had people piss on my car in my driveway. I've had people smash glass bottles in my driveway. Okay? So like all I'm saying is when I tell you it's a safety issue,
Mm,
that is a boundary. I am letting you know how you can connect with me safely.
yeah.
Because, a boundary is more like it allows you to reach through the fence and hold hands. It's not like I built a wall and Lawrence can have to take a hammer and hammer it down. So,
I
anyways,
like
if
that
I
analogy. It's
find
good.
out that you put any of my private information out there like that, like that's a boundary. I'm letting you know. I'm with Eleanor on this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually went to my employer because I am a teacher, so I work for a public school district, and I don't usually say where I work exactly online anywhere. I will tell past employers, I'll put past employers on LinkedIn all the time, but not where I currently work. And I actually asked them, I put in a ticket with IT and said, do not list me in the staff directory. I have had issues with stalkers before, and I don't want people to know where I work at all. And they removed me from the staff directory. So that was awesome.
That's really good.
And I told a couple of other people who I know that are LGBT, who are my coworkers, that they could do that too, because, like groups like Libs of TikTok and other people come after people and try to get people fired and all this other stuff. And so to make that difficult, it's just nice to remove whatever your current employer is online.
Yeah.
That is really good. I'm so glad they did that for you.
And then when I was, at one point, I was involved in a lawsuit against a newspaper that I worked for because they didn't pay overtime. And they also were gender discriminating. And right after I filed the lawsuit, there was a bomb threat at my Starbucks, like someone left a bomb. Turns out now it was totally unrelated, but at the time I was afraid because I knew that the person who owned the newspaper was a billionaire super lawyer who was very well known and very politically connected in Texas. So my mind was like running crazy with all these like possibilities. And it turns out, no, it was just a totally random guy. It was completely unrelated coincidence. But like when you're in the moment in that survival mode, you know, you're like, well, is it my former employer? Are they trying to kill me so I can't sue them? I don't know. Like, so also people are just kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I try to like not have my public details out there.
And that's why, though, because people do all kinds of things. I find this interesting, though. Jennifer says they didn't want me back. They wanted to torture me without giving me an opportunity to come back. Have you ever heard of accounts like that? Where people
I
weren't.
haven't personally, I don't think, but I could be wrong.
No? Okay. Because I've heard from people where they're like, look, I was the first person from my church of origin, and they don't want like to report like the abuse I had experienced, and they don't want me back. They're like, you're going straight to hell. It's like you're on playing Monopoly. Do not pass go. Go straight to hell. Like that's it. You don't get paid $200. You don't get nothing.
No.
But that's also part of the mandated shunning. Like, so if somebody is marked like that, like once you're in apostate, once you're part of the group that they see as not, you're not good quality enough, you're not conforming enough, then what happens if people inside the group still affiliate with you Is it safe for them to do so without social repercussions?
Oh gosh, no.
Really? What repercussions could there possibly be for saying hi to me? Go
I think the
on.
list is incredibly long.
What? Like, I'm just, look, is it the red hair?
No, I think when in my particular group, I did have friends that reached out after I had left and after I'd been shunned, and incredibly grateful for them. I know with one particular experience, my mum found out, and she was having off and on contact with me due to the birth of one of my children. And so she found out that a friend caught up with me. She decided to tell the pastor. The pastor then spoke with that particular friend, who then messaged me and said she thinks that it would be best if we just didn't hang out anymore until I had returned back to the fold, and that she meant no hard feelings, and then she blocked me on social media.
What an open, honest conversation here.
Oh yeah, it was a back and forth. It was a two-way street. No, it was one-sided.
Oh my word. Man, that hammer of biblical authority really came
Yeah.
down that day. The hammer of the Lord wielded by the pastor. Okay, then.
And being within the family and the fold, I think for particularly my upbringing, the image was everything. And if that image wasn't squeaky clean and wasn't up to par, then the fear was people would look in and people would see the cracks, and people would call you unholy, or that you weren't praying enough and you weren't seeking enough of I suppose guidance. And especially then when you mix in talking to people who have been shunned, it's a temptation. It's a fleshy temptation, I suppose. And again, it's all leading back to that mental health effects of guilt, and how do you grieve people that you've lost that are still alive?
You know, they have to make examples out of people who leave the fold, people who become non-compliant with their directives, people who reject their authoritarian leadership, because that example they make out of the way they treat us serves as a warning. But it's also a thing where you get people like your mother who become the enforcers, like your mother. What did she benefit from by going and telling the pastor about this? What benefit did she get?
I genuinely believe it was almost like a spiritual cleansing. I don't see it really as, like, I genuinely think there was enough fear within her and within individuals in that group to go, if I don't dob or if I don't say something, I'm automatically going to just go to hell. My spiritual walk in that moment has now been completely derailed, and I need to get it back on track, and I need to come clean. And I think that in that moment, deep down, was what it was again, if I isolate my child enough on the outside world from what she used to know, she'll come back. And I never did. I did once, but that was again years later. And I never went to a meeting.
Yeah. So she obtained some self-righteousness.
Yeah.
And I almost want to say that it almost sounds like she didn't just obtain self-righteousness. Is there an element of like the purity? Like you said, it seems like she got a cleansing from it, of like she got like an absolution of salvation from doing this, because she did the Lord's work, and the Lord's work is throwing her child to the world. Because you're living this worldly life where she's like your such a negative influence that anybody that shows you basic human kindness has to be brought up and publicly shamed or humiliated in front of the group so I can retain my godly walk to the gates of heaven. You know, all I'm remembering right now is like the Bible verse that talks about casting your pearls before the swines. But what do I know? I'm not a pastor. Eleanor, do you have thoughts about this?
I have so many thoughts, but I can't like think of a way to talk about them succinctly. It's like I have so many thoughts about all of that.
I think there's a lot to unpack there. Like it's like one little thing, but it's like upholding the authority of the church, upholding the holiness and the godliness, upholding the absolution of salvation, upholding the us versus them mentality, harming your
Like my
children.
church actually.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I actually remember our church kneeling down and praying whenever Obamacare got passed because they thought it was so evil. They had everyone like kneel down between the pews, like on their knees and pray because it was so awful because they were so concerned about Obamacare and abortions. They didn't really care about other stuff, but they cared about that. And they were so upset. They were like, "You have to pray for our country and this is evil and God's gonna punish us for this and all this kind of stuff." So
Okay.
yeah, since you said
So
that,
what did they think?
thought.
What did they think was meant in the Bible when women are instructed to drink certain teas?
Yeah,
I mean,
or
I have
like the part
questions.
about
If you really want to go there, abortion is in the Bible. But thank you.
exactly, or like the part about taking care of the widows and orphans. I yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So when you're talking about that, like what they're doing is they're again like painting this something Obamacare. What did that actually do for people?
Mhm.
What did it actually do
Well, a lot of
versus
my
what they told
friends with
you?
disabilities were, yeah, my friends with disabilities were actually able to get health care. And that was a turning point for me when I started realizing that, like a lot of things I've been told by conservative people were just wrong. When I found out that a lot of things actually benefited people that I was told were super evil.
Yeah. So how's it feel nowadays to even think about that?
Really strange. And I tend to think about it in the part of town that I'm sitting in right now, because that's where a lot of these things happen. I kind of avoid
I'm
driving
sorry.
by here a lot, actually, because it brings up so many thoughts and like feelings of what things felt like then, and like not knowing. I remember just like riding on my bike or walking around this area and feeling so ungrounded because everything I knew I had lost. And it was like, well, now what? Now what do I do? Because it's really hard to lose everything at once.
Mm-hmm.
Like your community, your family. And like now, like 10 years later, things are different. Like I have a relationship with my family with boundaries because like some other people in my family are not part of that group anymore. And also my parents are now like less extreme, and they've realized that they could lose a lot more family connections than just me if they are more extreme. So like I've been able to reestablish some relationships, but and then my parents actually realized that the pastor had been a dishonest person when the whole secret Russian marriage thing came up. So There's also that. But like at the
Oh my
time, it
God.
was really unsettling, and I had made it clear that I wanted to stay in touch with my family, and I wanted to stay in touch with my siblings, and I didn't. I just wanted to move out and start my own life. That was literally it. Um, so it's really hard for other members of my family. Sometimes they said, "Yeah, when we look back at that time, it feels like a divorce between you and mom and dad."
Oh my God. So it feels like a divorce between you, your mom and dad, and then the church kicked you out, and then you were
Yeah.
basically like 22 years old, just trying to live your life, and you're just thrown to the wolves. Okay.
Yeah, and I also like I was very cautious in some ways and very trusting in other ways. And so I've been trained to not trust any people that were not Christian. Like when I first called, I was like, I need to call someone. I'm suicidal when I was living in my parents' house. So I called folks on the family hoping they would help me. And instead they were like, you just need to go to a college Bible study and like be more in community. And I was like, okay, but my dad's not gonna let me. They were like, well, your parents will surely like, come around. That wasn't happening. So like there's suggestions. I mean, I get that like sure, being less isolated would help anybody, like whether you're in a high control religious group or not. But this was also unhelpful advice. And they don't like refer you to anybody else, like, a crisis line or anything like that, which would have actually helped. But I was afraid of all of those resources because they were not Christian. So I was afraid to reach out to them. And it took me a long time. Like, I remember the first few weeks after I moved out, I was like, do I trust this resource or not? Because it's secular. It's not from my little bubble in the world. And I realized I was leaving that bubble, but also I was scared to like talk to my therapist who wasn't Christian, and stuff like that. So it was really hard to know, do I trust this? But then at the same time, I was also overly trusting of other people in my life, people who seemed supportive at first. And so I thought, okay, well, I think I can trust them. And then it turned out they were not good people, or they were abusive to friends of mine, or predatory in other ways. And I saw how they treated other people around me. And then I realized they were not actually good people, even though they seemed supportive of people who were leaving environments like this.
I think like often that part that you're talking about, the trusting, like people often think like, oh, trauma survivors, we just don't trust anybody. But people often don't talk about that, where we just over trust people, that we later can look back and we can be like, oh my God, like, why did I trust this person? You
Yes.
know? And so like I'm like super cautious, okay, in many ways. But I'm also like, I've taken so many steps to be able to connect with people. And
Yes.
I just think that we have to find ways to build meaningful connections. But another thing is when you start talking about the long-term impacts of shunning. And to be clear, we're talking about mandated social isolation. I don't care if you call it disfellowshipping. Oh, it's just a Bonenmeitung. It's church discipline. It's excommunication. They're just showing me tough love. You're just making your things right with the church. I don't care what you call it if it results in social isolation. Group mandated social isolation. That is what I'm talking about. Oh, another one, the Holdeman Mennonites call it the avoidance. Some groups don't even call it anything. They just like say, well, are you sure it's good to be so close with those worldly people? And what do you call it when your pastor's sitting there? One of them casts out Eleanor and the other one, Lauren. Like your pastor's all like, click, get out. Get away from my congregation. Bye. What do you call that? How is that not mandated when it's coming from the top down?
And I think that's where if there was a law that protected against it, I think it would be better. But there is no other way to explain it other than it comes exactly like you said from the top. It's from the top down, and those that don't enact on it are at risk of being shunned or backslidden or disfellowshipped as well themselves. And some people don't want to risk that. It's fear as
Publicly
well.
shamed, humiliated, harassed, etc.,
Yeah.
etc. Like the list is like there's a lot of different consequences. So I don't know if Eleanor's aware of this. I know Lauren is aware of this, but there is a project called the Stop Mandated Shunning Project. And I have been talking about this because it is something that I care about deeply. Um, it is still going on. I will put a link in the comments of this video and the audio when we upload it to our podcast. But I would highly encourage you to share this information because one of the ways that societal change happens is when we collect data and we collect numbers. And then we can say, okay, for these groups, these things happen. These are the common threads regardless of whether it's IFB or I can never remember your church name, your former church. Lauren, what was your church name?
Geelong Revival Centre.
Yeah, Geelong Bible Center. I think I got it. Whichever one it is, or I was Amish. I was Old Order Amish and Native Troyer Amish. So like when you start talking about these different groups and you say, well, these things happened within these groups, now you're able to kind of like collectively say, okay, so for this many people who left the group, or if you are part of one of these groups and you want the data to be more reflective of all experiences, you're also invited to go respond to this mandated shunning survey and answer the survey questions. The reason being is when people within the group answer these questions, what happens is you get a more complete picture of what is happening, and then perhaps we can have some kind of idea of how to address this issue appropriately. Instead of just saying, I wasn't shunned, but, my group of origin practiced tough love or avoidance or disfellowshipping or excommunication or church discipline or whatever the list of things is. I mean, y'all probably got your own examples to add to that, but that's just mine.
Well, and like in the Pentecostal church, because I have friends who have left the conservative apostolic Pentecostal church. It's such a interesting group because after I had left the IFB, I visited my friend's church, and they were kind of trying to get me to join their church, and I knew that, but I wasn't gonna do that. But also, I cared about my friend, and I had the feeling because we've been going through similar stuff with both of our pastors that they would also probably leave at some point or realize it wasn't great for them. Such a weird group. They literally have a theme song. You can look it up on YouTube where they sing, I'm a Pentecostal, I am not ashamed. Read the book of Acts. We are just the same. We worship only one God and Jesus is his name. It's so weird. They're like, I'm a Pentecostal. And I'm like, this is so weird. Like, who has a theme song for your cult? I don't get it. Anyway, so my friend and I joke about that song. That's so extra.
Okay.
Apparently, Jehovah's Witnesses also have a song for their.
No, we have a
themselves.
song too. I have not heard of a single Old Order Amish church that does not know this song. It's page 1 in the little songbook. It's called "Oh God Father," and it goes like this: Oh, yeah.
So interesting. I mean, I guess the closest thing we had was what's that one song they have kids sing a lot? Onward Christian Soldiers. The ultimate Christian nationalist theme. Yeah. So we would sing that sometimes.
Oh my God.
To war. Have you heard that one?
No, but you know where I was introduced to that song? There's a book that okay, it's a Christmas Carol Kaufman book. First off, I don't read her books for pleasure anymore, but anyways, she wrote this book called One Way's Battle, and it's about this Christian boy who like runs away from home and goes and joins the military, and there's like that song in there. But we weren't allowed to sing that song because we are conscientious objectors. Okay.
Wow.
We are conscious. My stepfather was a conscientious objector, I'll have you know. Okay. Like, I'm just saying.
Wild.
So,
Wow.
yeah. It's funny how that was your theme song and we weren't even allowed to touch it, but we had our own.
Right? It's like, that's the thing. Is like, well, it's kind of like how my Pentecostal friends, for them, speaking in tongues was mandatory. Like, if you didn't speak in tongues, you weren't saved. And if you weren't baptized in Jesus' name, not just like the Trinity, they didn't believe in the Trinity. They believed in oneness. And that like all the pieces of the deity are like one. So if you didn't have that, then you weren't really saved. And my IFB background over here was like, well, if you speak in tongues, you are demon possessed. And so we thought that everybody who spoke in tongues had this major issue and they were demon possessed. So it was really interesting to become friends with someone who was Pentecostal, and we came from these like complete opposite backgrounds. And I remember going to like their services and stuff, and it was so interesting. They actually at one point, there's a YouTube video about this. I think a series. I think I've showed it to you, but they asked me to like go undercover and dress as them because we could go in and do things without the church repercussions that they could not do because their families might suffer or other things might happen, and pressure could be put on them. But they were like, "You guys aren't involved in the same way. You can go in for us and like record and do stuff." So we went in like undercover, which was really fun. Yeah. And so they had this whole thing where it was kind of like church discipline, but they didn't call it that, but they called it either you were on the platform or you were not. So either you could be like up on the stage and like dancing and speaking in tongues and being filled with the Holy Ghost or whatever. But if the pastor thought that you had disobeyed, like sometimes it was that their pastor maybe, or their parents had searched their room or their car and found out that they had rock music and things that weren't technically allowed by the church. And so they would be like, well, you're going to be taken off the platform for a month. Like, you can't be an example to everybody else because you have sinned and you have to repent. And then maybe we'll put you back on the platform.
So we're not shunning people, but we take you off the platform. That is the ultimate demonstration of your holiness.
And then anybody
who
left, yes, anybody who left was considered, they called it backsliding.
I'm a backslider for sure.
Yeah. And then they would tell stories about the backsliders. Like, they had a whole play that they acted out at the church that my friend told me about that was very traumatic because it was about how some girl was really good person. She was raised in the Pentecostal church, and her grandfather was a fourth generation Pentecostal preacher. Like, in their church structure, like UPCI, Apostolic Pentecostal, it's really important what generation Pentecostal you are. We didn't have that in the IFB like at all. But it's like super important who you descended from, I guess. And so this girl like had everything right.
Pause. I am 11th generation born in America, and this matters, okay? Also, what kind of worldly Christians were you? Because you know that the Bible says no man knows, so it is not up to us to decide who has absolution of salvation. No man can know who will make it through the pearly gates. Okay, continue.
That is so, wow, yeah. So you guys had the generations too. And see, we didn't have that. So I was like, what? How does it matter? Like, what? Because we it was always emphasized to people in the IFB that like it doesn't matter if your grandparents were saved or if your parents were saved. You had to be saved, like, which is a super evangelical born again talking point. So yeah. Well, where was I? So anyway, like, this girl had been like super Pentecostal, and in this play that their church would do. And then she went to a movie. Gasp, the horror. How dare she? And she was with a guy in a car alone and went to a movie. How
I'm
scandalous.
sorry.
And then she was hit by a train or something, or another car, and had a horrible car accident. And then they showed her ghost, and her ghost came back to the church and visited her body and realized that she had died, and her coffin and everything was laid out for the church. And then it shows her getting dragged away by demons. And that's what my friends had to deal with growing up with. So there was a lot of fear for them when they left. I mean, there's a lot of fear for me too, but like they had some specific things that they were told would happen to them if they left the church.
Yeah. That's they're villainizing anybody who's outside of the church, which often makes it easier for people to justify acts of violence or horror against them. But with that being said, we're gonna wrap things up now. If y'all have like any thoughts, this is my favorite part of the entire recording. If y'all have any thoughts for anybody who might be experiencing mandated shunning or struggling, do you have any thoughts about how they might navigate that or what you would want them to know? Either or.
I think maybe something I would say is, how do I word it? Not worrying so much about what's going to happen at the end. I think I put so much focus into how much time left I had on the world and on the planet, as opposed to just living day by day and finding the small joys in parenting, or finding the joys in going for a walk with friends, or meeting new people, watching new movies, things like that. Find the joy in it.
Thank you for that. I think it's really important to find joy in just life. You're allowed to have joy. Also give yourself permission to have joy. What about you, Eleanor? Do you have any thoughts?
It's really hard at first. Like, I knew it would be hard when I first left. It, like, people told me, like, actually I had a therapist that my parents allowed me to see right before I left, and he actually encouraged me to move out. So he was my very first therapist before I saw the therapist at my college. And he said, because I was like, okay, well, isn't the answer maybe just to move out? I mean, because I'm really suicidal staying in my parents' house. I don't see how I can live with this level of control anymore and not being able to express myself at all. And he said, well, are you ready for what that might mean and for what the cost of that might be? And I said, I think so. And he said, I don't know if you're ready yet. Think about it. Like, go home and journal about it. Really think. And I did. And that actually was helpful, because I thought, what if I do lose contact with my family? What if I do lose my church? Like, those are extreme examples. I thought, at the time I thought, well, maybe it'll work out. And then I talked to one of my English professors, and he said, because I was like, well, but doesn't this eventually work out? Like, my parents might be mad for a while, but won't they like get over it, and then we all kind of move through it? And he said, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it doesn't. And you do have to make that choice, but only you can make that choice. And those are things I try to tell people who are leaving or getting ready to leave, because only you know when it's time. There have been times earlier on when I was trying to help my college friends leave, when I really wanted to make that choice for them, and I couldn't. And I knew that logically, but I really wanted them to be safe. And like, one of my college friends, her mother made a joke about killing her cats, and made some other like violent comments. And I was really afraid for my friend living in that house. And I was really glad when we were able to go get her stuff. Like, mom was gone to a conference, and we were able to go in and get their stuff. And um, we like recruited some friends. That was another reason why I started that grassroots Facebook group, because I could just say like, "Hey guys, we have a case." Like, that was my wording for it. Hey, we have a case. We have someone who needs help. We need to go active. I'm going to give you the address. Like, can you show up at this time of this day? And then we would go in, get the stuff, and leave. And again, it was just like, it's the same way you do any community organizing, the same way you do any activism. There was nothing really special to it, but it was for this specific purpose and this specific population. And now I've gotten better at like waiting for when people are ready to leave, and when they tell me that they're ready to go, and if they, what kind of help they need. Um, but it's something that each person has to decide for themselves. And it can be like, even though it's going to be difficult, you don't really always know exactly how it's going to feel until you're there. But there's like a lot of other people who have had very similar experiences, even if your coworkers have like never heard of your obscure religious group before, and they're like, what even? Like, I have friends that, like, people that were my coworkers at Starbucks, and now we both work in the education system. And they ask me sometimes, hey, like, I heard about this weird fundamentalist person. Do you know anything about them? And I get to explain it. So there are those people who they seek out people like us for education and stuff like that. And it may feel very lonely sometimes, but there are actually enough weird religious groups that you're not alone. There's definitely a lot of other people who have had these experiences, and the internet is bringing a lot of us together.
Yeah. And I would also say that it's important if you're trying to assist people outside of these groups or people to escape an abusive environment where they're being experiencing mistreatment from a group or a specific family unit or what have you. When you're trying to assist people to escape these environments, the first and most foremost thing that I always find the most beneficial is when people gave me the autonomy to make decisions about my own life, but also provided information so that I could make an informed decision. And one of the things
Mhm.
that I will never forget is the first time that somebody informed me that these are the options, okay? And we walked through like all of these options. And I said, okay, so I said, what option would you recommend? And they're like, well, I can recommend an option all you want, but like at the end of the day, it's your life.
Mhm.
It's your life, and you have to be able to live with that. Not only that, you know what the right thing is for you. You know what you can live with. And even if you choose this option that I probably think I wouldn't have, even if you choose that option and later you learn that perhaps this was not the most ideal option, you have learned from it. You need practice in making good decisions for your own life, and you
Mhm.
get to do that. That was my introduction to victim empowerment principles. When I tell
Yeah.
you it is vital that you operate from a person centered approach, that is what I'm talking about. You do not make decisions for people within these groups because by doing so, you're infantilizing them. By doing so, you're also projecting your will onto them.
And
By
also,
doing so, you're saying you know more about their lives than they do. And
and
also,
also
what?
like, and also, like, so many times that choice was not given to them at all. So it may be crippling for them to make a choice at first. Just like, I wanted my friend to get out of their mom's house because I don't want them hurt. That's a natural response. But at the same time, only they know when they're ready to go. Because when people extract people too early, a lot of times they go back. Like,
Hmm.
but when they're fully ready to leave and they have weighed every option and maybe even left a time or two and gone back, then they can fully make that break for themselves.
And for me, that took months of intensive outpatient therapy for complex and chronic PTSD when I was 19. But I have never been tempted to go back and live Amish again. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I'm just saying. So, anyways, with that being said, I also want you to know that, like, even if you make decisions that later you feel like weren't very good decisions, try to be as gentle as you can with yourself, because when you haven't had the opportunity to make decisions about your life, sometimes you really, again, need practice making decisions about your life. And you are capable of making decisions. You are capable and you get to do so. And as always, a reminder, hold on to hope, because hope is something that keeps us going even when it feels like we're in the abyss of despair and darkness. And we really need to hold on to hope sometimes, especially when we feel like we're crippled or we're just unable to move because we're frozen and we don't have options. Sometimes we really got to hold on to hope. I want to thank Eleanor and Lauren for coming and having this conversation. It's been a delight. Well, not a delight to hear about the horrible things that y'all experience, but it's been an honor to have you guys here to talk about this topic. As a reminder, the guests on our live streams reflect a diverse set of values, morals, and ethics that may not reflect the morals, values, and ethics of the Misfit Amish. Thank you all for listening and engaging with this content. As always, you can like, comment, subscribe, and share. This podcast is brought to you by the Misfit Amish and our Patreon subscribers. The art is by BJK and MB. And until next time, y'all live your best